Returning to live in the sleepy fishing village of Girvan after divorce, redundancy and cancer surgery felt like a backward step for me, and really the idea of getting back into the MA was to kickstart my photographic passion. The original ideas of following people in recovery from drugs and alcohol had fallen by the wayside, and I initially found comfort by walking on the beach and capturing sunsets in this part of the world. It was a chance comment though by a local shopkeeper that sparked a new interest from me when he told me that the high street had been hung out to dry, and that led me to imagine a whole range of photographs of different buildings in the high street on a washing line, and I decided that was what I was going to try and do, to see if I could actually visually represent the way the high street had been hung out to dry. The first approach I took to this process was to actually walk up and down the full length of Dalrymple Street, which is the main shopping thoroughfare in Girvan, and I did this with an iPhone, taking video footage just to really allow myself to have a long critical look and capture evidence that I could then review on my computer at home on a point of view basis, to actually walk along the high street on my computer, have a look at what was actually happening, and get some ideas, hints and tips about what I could do when I went back out with a camera to photograph every single individual building. Nothing particularly difficult about this, but I found that shooting in video was a bit more challenging than I thought it was going to be as someone who's always shot in stills. And again, even within this process, I still wasn't fully convinced that the high street had been left out to dry. I guess shooting video and paying attention to what I was doing meant I couldn't give 100% attention to the high street itself. But it was only when I went out to actually photograph the individual buildings and bring them back and hang them on the makeshift washing line that I began to see in actual fact there was something happening on the high street, and that really surprised me. Susan Sontag tells us, "The painter constructs, the photographer discloses." I was mindful of that when I was taking the images of the individual shops, and when I got back to my apartment with the mini clothes pegs and the washing line and the space all laid out, I did wonder what I would actually be disclosing. I wondered what I could actually show, given that my impression of the high street had been that it hadn't really been hung out to dry in my view at all. It was simply another ordinary high street. So with that in mind, I, like I say, printed all the images. I hung them up with the clothes pegs on the washing line. I filmed walking up and down the high street virtually in the hallway. I took individual photographs to record and reference what I was doing from this. And then I had a brainwave. I took the images of all the shops, businesses and premises that were empty, derelict, or had closed down, or were simply no longer functioning, and I turned them in themselves to become a white sheet. And I then refilmed and rephotographed the little exhibition of everything hanging up. And that was revelationary for me, because I could then see at a glance there really was a problem on the high street. I had uncovered something for myself, that 30% or thereabouts of all the businesses on the high street had actually failed over the course of the last 10 years since I last lived in town, and that was a remarkable moment for me. It's something that I could see visually that I wasn't able to see before. At this stage I also drew some inspiration from a comment by Chris Pors in his book Reunions, when he said, "I got bored with writing long sociological essays in university and found it much more satisfying to point my camera at society. I guess my photographs say something about me and how I see, and perhaps how I would like society to be." That really resonated with me. At about this time, I was also given a couple of old photographs and postcards of Girvan, and it sparked an idea I'd had way back in the 1990s when I bought a book called Paris Passé Présent, looking at imaging two different scenes from exactly the same angle, and I began to wonder if there was any way I could document what had been in society in the past in Girvan with what was currently in the present, to see if there was any correlation or any photographic merit in producing something that fused the two images together. In undertaking this, I was aware of Susan Sontag's comment that photographs are a way of imprisoning reality. One can't possess reality, one can possess images, one can't possess the present, but one can possess the past. Thanks to the section on rephotography in this module, I was impressed by the work of Sun Sek-an and Diane Quinlan, looking both at their homeland in Korea and indeed at the attack in Pearl Harbor, both of which have had an influence in the work that I'm now undertaking. Jeffrey Batchen suggests that we look at photographers as though we're gazing through a two-dimensional window, and my initial approach to the project in Girvan, looking at past and present, was to print all the different images out onto paper, laminate them, and then walk out into the street and hold these at arm's length in front of me. It's an approach that I found modestly successful, but I still wasn't sure it was conveying the image I wanted to get to. For me, this approach sat in between Song-Sang Anne and Diane Quinlan's work, but I still wasn't comfortable with it because I don't like having my photograph taken, and I didn't think anybody wanted to see my hand in every single shot. For me, it was distraction from the image in hand, no pun intended. At this time too, I was putting some of the images I was creating onto Facebook to one of the local pages and getting a huge amount of interest in it, to the extent that people began donating books and images and postcards to me to try and help me develop more of these images. What I was really looking to do was produce something a bit more seamless, where the postcard would actually blend in with the background, but I was really struggling to do that with the difference in perspectives. Through for me was a change in working practice to actually use the digital camera I had as a box brownie by flipping out the screen and dropping it down to waist level. Once I'd begun doing that, the images then began to blend perfectly. A sequence of old images, new images, and the juxtapositions between them demonstrate this perfectly. It was something I hadn't considered, somebody who's 6'3" holding a digital camera up to his eye versus somebody who 100 years ago was 5'7" holding it at waist level. The difference speaks for itself. Another change in my working practice was to use Photoshop in a different way, and that is to take the old image and use the distort and the perspective tools to actually manipulate the old image into the current image. And again, I found myself harking back to the 10x8 and 5x4 plate camera days, where exactly the same camera mechanisms were used by people to make the images look perfect horizontally and perfect vertically. It's exactly the same process in Photoshop, and a new skill that I had to learn to be able to do this project. The new images with the seamless transition from the old postcard to the new photograph that I've taken is now something that I'm going to focus on as part of my FMP. Something that I was very conscious of in taking the photographs as somebody with Asperger's is the fact that I'm not very good socially. I don't integrate with people very well, and I find social situations very difficult. For me then, a personal change, a developmental change for me was actually realising that the old photographs only said so much, and it was worth getting behind the people who worked and lived on the high street and to tell some of their stories. That, for me, looking ahead, will be a part of the project that sits alongside but not necessarily becomes the project in itself. Something that I will explore, perhaps similar to the Humans of New York and Humans of London project, where maybe I'll be able to talk to more people in Girvan and get their stories and move away from the high street as such in its own right. Further exciting development has been the opportunity to get out onto the island of Ailsa Craig, a place where a guy called Charles Kirk was 100 years ago taking photographs, and maybe do the old and new approach over there. It's kind of ironic then in this particular module that I started out taking photographs of this island from the beach, and I now will probably end the FMP doing a similar project on the island itself. Never been done before, and I'm really excited about it.